Hello, welcome to my presentation. My name is Benjamin Scott. I'll be presenting on instilling a culture of craftsmanship. But before we get started on that topic, I want to thank Devnexus for letting me speak here. It's been a great conference in the past. It's my first time actually speaking here. I was really wishing to speak in person, but we'll try this video recording aspect. This presentation is typically very interactive, so please use the chat feature. I will give you prompts throughout the presentation when I'm asking questions. Please answer in the chat and I'll interact with you there. I'll try to make room for a little bit longer of Q&A at the end so that we can have discussion based on your own context at your different work streams, so we can talk about that. Let's get into who I am. Again, I'm Ben. I was born in France. I was raised there. I came here in the United States in 2001. Went to Virginia Tech, where I got my computer science degree. I also met my wife there, Cecilia. I have two kids, Andre and Elias, 9 and 7. And after graduating from Virginia Tech, I joined the company Happy Fabrics as a software developer, mostly C development. I got introduced to different testing frameworks, although they're archaic. Our process framework was chaotic. We didn't really follow one. But after a few years there, we got introduced to Agile, Scrum in particular. And it really struck a chord with me, particularly the engineering disciplines that came along with it, with extreme programming. I eventually moved out of Happy Fabrics, went to Ippon Technologies, my current company. Come check us out. We are sponsoring this conference. We have a booth. We're hiring. Always looking for cool work, so just come over and chat. At Ippon, I've held a few roles already. I joined as a Scrum Master, then moved on to a developer coach, went on to as a software architect, helped out at different companies, either as a craftsmanship coach, as bootstrapping startups, and now I lead the software engineering practice. But that's enough about me. Let's talk Agile. So I have a few names on the screen. As you recognize them, maybe you know who they are without Googling. If you pop in the chat, who you think they are, where you recognize those names. Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, Robert Martin, and so on. I'll pause for a second. So I typically get two different answers. I've done this talk at Agile conferences, and I've done engineering places as well. And I typically get one of the two answers. One side will say, well, they're the founder of Agile. They're the original signers of the Agile Manifesto, which is true. And they are developers and well-known developers. They've written books, multiple books on different aspects, and they created Agile, which is amazing when you think about it, especially when you look at Agile today. Developers hate it, and then the Agile practitioners sometimes could be have zero understanding of what it takes to actually develop software, and you seem to be in conflict. So part of my passion of having been in both worlds is kind of build that bridge back, bring Agile back to developers, kind of give you a roadmap to what that should look like. I call that craftsmanship. I'm not alone in that movement. There's a new manifesto that will show at the end of my slides. I'm not a signer on it. I'm just co-opting it, and that's something that I'm passionate about. When I get hired at companies, I typically go in as a technical coach. They have issues with their different deliveries, quality of code, time to market. Those are the subjects that come in those pre-sales conversations and how they can help. Most of the time, they have already an idea of how to solve it, and they don't hire me for my craftsmanship, thought leadership, or any of those things. They hire me for one thing only: test-driven development. Come to my teams, teach test-driven development, and everything will be peachy. Big, nice rainbow. Your code will be bug-free. Will deliver faster. It's a dream come true. I'm here to tell you, though if you're a developer, you probably know this already. And if you're an engineering manager that's looking at test-driven development as a solution, it is not the solution. Test-driven development is simply a tool in a craftsmanship tool belt, but it is not a solution to solve actually anything. It's actually a process of writing code that is not simple, especially when we're looking at enterprise code. It's very easy to do in a workshop. And code katas is how it's typically taught. Writing Fibonacci and test-driven development, all that stuff is easy. And then you take those concepts back to your enterprise code, and you're asked to write an authenticated endpoint that has to connect to a database, and do that in test-driven fashion, and you stumble. Well, how do I do that? How do I fake my OAuth token? How I have so many things to mark, and the data is kind of obtuse. What do I do with all this stuff? And so before we get to test-driven development, especially if you're not used to testing, we kind of have to lay the foundations of testing, the foundations of craftsmanship, all that good stuff. So let's talk about craftsmanship from a developer perspective, a tech lead perspective, or a technical type perspective. And I'll get to the Scrum Masters, product owners, and their relation on the later slide. I have on the slide a few boxes that kind of lead towards that craftsmanship. Those are the things I look for and will focus on whenever I join a team or organization. I particularly like to start with code reviews, but you can pick any of these things to focus on first, depending on your organizational needs. And again, in the chat, if you could pop out a couple comments on how you do code reviews. Do you do them in a very structured way? Do you do them in a hierarchical way, where the tech lead is the gatekeeper of your code? Do you use a PR system for your code reviews? Do people pull it into their IDE and do a code review locally? What's your process? Does it work for you? Is it laborious? Those kinds of things. So for me, code review is where it all starts. If you care about craftsmanship, this is where we start to really care about it and build that community of craftsmen. And perhaps I should define what is a craftsman, especially when it comes to code or software development. Craftsmanship is typically associated with like an electrical craftsman, plumbers, woodworking, and they spend years learning their craft and perfecting it. As developers, it should be the same for us. We should perfect our craft. We should keep getting better. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we get faster. That's not the whole point at all of craftsmanship, is that we actually deliver better code. Not fast code, but good code. And if you keep doing that, and keep working on your craft, and keep producing better and better code, you will get fast. It's just the bad product of being a craftsman. And that's what we want. And that where that code review really helps with that is that we get to start inspecting each other's code and talking about it and start to share our perspectives and our design patterns. Why did we use an observable pattern here? What did we use a factory pattern? What are patterns? Maybe you have a junior that's never heard of them. And you start talking about why you use a particular pattern, and then you get into what patterns are, why we should use them, how do they evolve, and it creates that mentorship relationship between the developers. That's why I have mentors here. You really want to focus on growing mentors on your teams and making sure that they're rewarded for that behavior. I also have clean on here. For me, clean is about your code base. It's a clean code base. It's a readable code base. It's a maintainable code base. All those things would help with that craftsmanship aspect. So clean can mean things as simple as naming your variables what they actually represent versus the shorthand. not using acronyms, but full-fledged words, naming your methods accurately, not having methods that are 500 lines long that do all the different kinds of things, but really having half-focused, readable code. And one of the things that I like to say in positive is that clean code is more important than correct code. Because if the code is clean, the code is readable, and a bug is detected, I will be able to go through the code base, identify where the issue is, find a solution, implement that solution, push that all the way to production pretty fast. It shouldn't take me too long to do that, even if the code base is not something I'm particularly familiar with. However, if you have a complicated code base, a lot of interdependencies, and it's correct, and I want to add a new feature to it, it might take me forever, and I may not understand all the different consequences of adding this feature in, and it will slow down your delivery on that. So as a big organization, at the enterprise, clean is definitely way more important than correctness in the long term. The other aspect of clean code is a developer ramp-up. At the enterprise, we typically work on multiple sets of teams on the same microservice architecture. We have developers come and go. We have your tech leads come and go. Your product owners come and go. So we have a constant shifting personnel workforce working on the same project. So the faster that these new people ramp up and get productive, the better it is for that enterprise. And the easiest way to ramp up is to be able to read and contribute to that code base faster. So that's where clean code, this principle. And there's a whole book called Clean Code. I highly advise to read it, but I won't get too much into those details. But to me, it is very, very important. I haven't really talked about tests yet, which might be strange to some of you. It is important, but it is not the be-and-all of craftsmanship. Testing will evolve naturally if you care about craftsmanship, but if you do test and think you're a craftsman, you're wrong. Your tests are there to improve your design, to ensure that you have a testable architecture, that you have a scalable architecture, provide you with a regression test suites, and give you that confidence that you can deploy to production without manual testing. That's why they are there for. But to do that right, you really need to invest the time on what is a proper testing framework. How do I ensure that it doesn't take too much time in your CI/CD pipeline? There's testing triangles, like theories on how to structure your different levels of testing, making sure that you have way more unit tests than integration test and then end-to-end test and so forth. But take the time to really learn how to test your application at all the different levels. And eventually, as you learn how to test and you become test infected, where you have to write your test, some of you may choose to go through test-driven development, and that's okay. On my teams, I actually don't force test-driven development. The only thing that I enforce is that your PR contains test, and it is tested with the units, acceptance, integration test, the whole gambit of tests. That is the only thing I enforce on my teams. I have found that forcing people to do test-driven development when it really doesn't jive with them is kind of counterproductive. But no one can argue that testing in the same PR or merge request is bad. They may say they don't have the time, they don't have the bandwidth, the skill set, all those kind of things. Those are detractors that can stop you from writing tests, and that's kind of why you need that Slack aspect. So Slack is not the tool Slack. It comes from XP. It's more like the Slack line. Make sure you have Slack in your line. That's where that term comes from. And if you're working with an Agile framework, you typically use a term like capacity. My team has a capacity of this amount of fictional points. And then you commit to a number as close to your capacity. So you filled up your sprint. Slack essentially says, take 10, 15, 20% of your capacity and just don't commit to anything. That gives you time to write better tests, time to do better code reviews, time to share code, time for the mentors to take time and not focus too much on the delivery of that software, but really focus on growing that whole team. Plus, it'll make your delivery way more reliable. That's something that your product owners and Scrum Master would appreciate if you're always delivering your stories that you're committed to, and you're working bettering yourself, which means over time your capacity increases. So even with Slack, you'll deliver more over time if you follow these principles. Before I move on to the next slide, if you have any questions on this, topics you want to revisit during the Q&A, now's a great time to pop in those questions so keep them top of mind as I move on to a different subject. All right, so now again, craftsmanship, different sets of blocks, but this one is more focused on the organization, a Scrum Master, a product owner. I have Slack here again, it's the exact same Slack. If your team needs Slack in their capacity, your product owner, and what you're planning to deliver for the PI or your next increment, you need some Slack on that too. You need to provide time for something to be built right, for people to improve their skills, all those things. And if you don't provide that Slack, you don't lead by example towards craftsmanship, you can't expect your teams to get better at anything if they don't have the time to do it. They won't do it on their own time, they'll be burnt out, and eventually they might leave your company and so forth and go somewhere else. That's typically what we see. But let's start with that vision. Here, I mean a vision statement. You have different companies, they always talk about their vision. And vision is really important to craftsmanship because it sets really that direction. What are we achieving? Why are we achieving it? And from that vision, you'll get the next layer, you get a roadmap, maybe a program or a project will have its own vision. But that allows the developers to really focus on, okay, if we're trying to achieve a web app and it's for a small set of users, maybe scalability is not that important. But if I'm going to have millions of users, scalability is going to be a big deal. So when you start making those technical decisions in architecture, roadmaps, and those things, this sets the tone of what they should be building. So when they make a decision for that one story, they know where it leads to, and they're going in the right direction. That roadmap is the next step of that vision. It gives you all those incremental features that you will be building. It sets the tone for what's important, and is the building block of that technical roadmap that the teams will need to build the right thing. I have team here. This is a bit of a dig on the Scrum Masters and product owners when I join different programs. Most of the time, the language that you use as a Scrum Master, that you use as a product owner, is the you language. You don't use we. You're part of the team. If you look at the Scrum framework, Scrum Master and product owner are team members of that team, and you're equally accountable to the success of that team, and you're equally capable of moving a story from start to finish. It doesn't mean you have to code, but it means instead of asking, is it done yet? Can it be moved to done? It should be more like, hey, is there anything I can do to make that story finish? Maybe I can jump in and do some testing. Do you need some documentation help? Or is there any approvals to release that story that I can help out with? Or those kinds of things. Like, you're part of that team help. Developers really appreciate that. They're swamped with everything that they have to learn, especially if they're new to that agile transformation, where they have to work on their own DevOps, testing, Docker, and they're learning about Spring Boot and all those different things that they may not be used to. And it's a lot to do all at once. So they'll appreciate if Scrum Master and Product Owners jump on as part of that team, and they really feel like they're the same team, not that they're just the gatekeepers to the program level. That's what lead kind of means, like you're part of the team leadership, you're part of the program leadership. Make sure that the words that you use, the incentives that you put forward, kind of lead towards that craftsmanship. Don't say, hey, I want this to be built right, but tomorrow it needs to be done. Make sure that you're leading in the right direction on that. Finally, I have incentives. This is something that's difficult to solve, and most of you cannot solve it. It's something that needs to be done at the organizational level, which is why I have the org aspect there. And that's kind of to look at what are we as a company incentivizing our people, our developers, our Scrum Masters to do. So that's something you can bring up maybe in retrospectives and inspecting what that looks like. And I'll give you a couple examples. If a senior developer or a tech lead is looked at what have you produced, how many stories have you finished, how many visionary architecture solutions that you brought out, then they're going to be focused on writing code. They're going to be focused on delivering something so that their review time with a bonus, they get the best that they can get. But are they incentivized to grow their team? Are they looking at the delivery of the team as a whole? Are they looking at that junior? Hey, that junior, when he joined or she joined, they delivered very few things. They were kind of lost, but after 6 months, they're a high productive member of the team. That doesn't happen because just by itself. That means somebody on the team grew that person, that junior, really brought them into the fold. And I do believe that the more senior you are, the more you should be incentivized as a team delivery. The more junior you are, the more it's about you. It's about how much are you learning, how much are you growing, how much are you delivering. So that's something to keep in mind. Another example that I have, that's more the product and Scrum Master level, is they get incentivized as the number of stories pushed through. So sometimes they really push the stories smaller and smaller to the point that they're too small to matter. They're too small to actually understand from a product perspective, and they become technical tasks. And that's really hard to be a craftsman when you do that. So behavior that like our Scrum Master's product is that BDD, the behavior-driven development, that really focuses on what should our application be doing, writing stories that reflect that behavior, and then delegating those technical aspects to the teams to deliver. Sorry. One of the first things I do when I join a team is read that backlog. And if I can't tell what business you are in by reading your backlog, there's something wrong. I should at least be able to tell I'm at a bank, I'm at a healthcare organization, I'm in retail, those kinds of things I should be able to get from that backlog. Obviously there's edge cases if you're part of the security team, those kinds of stuff, that's not really, that's a little bit different. But I should still be able to know what is your product, what are you building. And there's too many times when I just read, update database schema, modify REST endpoint contract, and those are your stories, and then you have to go out to the Epic or even higher than that to really understand what kind of business I'm in. If you're a Scrum Master, a product owner, or even developers have any questions on what I just said, please pop them into the chat, and we'll get them at the end. This is my last slide. I talked about the craftsmanship aspect at the very beginning, and this is the Craftsmanship Manifesto. I found it late into my craftsmanship journey, so I'm sad or ashamed to say that, because I should have found it earlier. But as you read that, you may realize that it's very close to the Agile Manifesto, where Agile Manifesto is like not just documentation, but working software, well-crafted software, those kinds of things. So here we don't care, like it's not just deliver code, it's deliver good code, good architecture. We don't actually value responding to change as much as we are steadily adding value to our product, to our customer, not just changing our minds all the time. It's not just about individual interaction, it's about a community of professionals, creating a mentorship group, making sure that people are growing in their skill set, they're growing into craftsmen. That's what we care about. Not just collaborating with our customers, but that both sides feel like they're getting something out of it. It's a productive partnership. We want to keep working together, and so forth. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you for coming. I'll see you soon in the live fashion to hopefully have a constructive discussion about this stuff. Thank you.